As we sat here first thing this morning and people were just trickling in, my worst fear grew that there would be more people on this panel than in the audience. So thank you for sparing us that. I decided the problem was not the topic, but the title. We hadn't done it properly. So we should have been a little catchier, maybe something like, Why Your Job Has a Future. So let me see if I can, in that vein, try and do what is impossible, which is to bring this lengthy project we've been engaged in for a few years of trying to understand our own history down to 12 slides, and that'll keep me limited in my focus. But first I want to start by thanking Austin Parrish, because he was a member of the executive committee, I think it was way back in 23, and he suggested, this association ought to have a history. He was very specific about it. He said, I'm thinking of sort of a coffee table book. We don't want one just that scholars will find on some dusty shelf in the library. And hence, things went forward. He persuaded everybody. One of the things the executive committee that year liked was a centennial history, and they were starting to appear, of some of the other professional societies, because late 19th century, early 20th is when so many of these professional gathering points were established. So the American Council of Learned Societies, of which we are a member, had its centennial in 2019. They put out a terrific scholarly summary of it. We turned to them and they suggested best singer design. They said they're great at restoring old photos, and they were. She in turn brought in Jean Waterman, who is neither a law professor nor indeed a lawyer, but she does know how to write persuasive, plain English, and she came to all of our assistance as a wonderful co-author. Austin and Melanie Wilson, who was then president-elect, were wonderful about reading all of the multiple drafts that this process went through. And we sent it around to a number of legal historians as well to save us from our biggest mistakes, ranging from Susan Carl and Laura Coleman to Mark Tishnet. So with that, let's move along. So we're progressing on the slides. Saratoga Springs. Why were we started in 1900, and why were we started in Saratoga Springs? Well, a lot had gone on in the late 19th century. There'd been a lot of economic development in the nation. And with that economic development, there was growing demand for lawyers. At the same time, the way we educated lawyers was dramatically changing. We'd inherited from England the notion of apprenticing with practicing lawyers, which had some benefits, but many detriments. And so increasingly, people were turning to law schools as a more efficient, if nothing else, way to actually begin to educate young lawyers. From the beginning, the one thing that was clear is that law professors did not want the government telling them what to do or how to teach. They believed by founding this association, we could assist each other in becoming the best possible law schools in the world. Lawyers, of course, from the beginning in the United States, played a more dominant role than in other countries. You probably know this, but I just learned that more than half of both of the initial Continental Congresses were made up of representatives trained in law. Not as many today, but lawyers still make up about 30% of the House and nearly half of the Senate. Make of that difference what you will. Beginning with John Adams, 27 of the 47 American presidents, so that's nearly 60%, have been trained in law. That founding gathering was held, as I mentioned, in Saratoga Springs in conjunction with a meeting of the American Bar Association. Now, put yourself back into 1900. It could take 4 to 5 days to travel from one coast to the other. And this is by train, of course. Only concluded mid-19th century. 47 law professors and deans showed up. They came from 35 different law schools, literally from around the nation geographically. Most of them traveled by train, and then once you got in, your choice was a zippy coach and buggy from the train station to the hotel. That's how things moved, but they showed up. I'm only going to single out a few names that maybe you'll remember someday. Simeon Baldwin. He was one of the key academics in arranging many of these things. He was then a law professor at Yale, and he was into associations. He joined one of the very first professional associations by the name of the American Social Science Association, founded in Boston, 1865. Discussions there inspired him to become a driving force in founding the American Bar Association in 1878. But that wasn't enough, and the law professors found that they were interested in some topics the lawyers weren't, and vice versa. So he helped found the AALS in 1900. Before he was done, Baldwin served as the president of the ABA, as the president of the AALS. He was our third, of the American Social Science Association, of the American Historical Association, and of the American Political Science Association. He was an association guy. At that first meeting, association articles, of course you can't have an association with articles, were discussed and adopted. And the understanding was that all law schools who would become members of this new association would have to comply with the articles if they wanted to join. Interesting, when you look at Article 9, and you may even be able to, by looking very carefully, see it here, notice that Article 9 established an executive committee to govern the association. And that same structure is still in place today. So something held for those 125 years. Okay, then we're going to do a big jump over the next 50 years. There's war, there's depression, and then there's another war. Did you ever think about how the law schools survived? So let me give you a little glimpse from World War II. Charles McCormick, he was president of the AALS in 1943 and dean of Texas Law School. He said that in the past year, law schools had lost 80% of their students. Think about this in your law school. They had lost 1/3 or more of their faculty, all to military service. Nonetheless, only 10 of the 94 member schools actually closed their doors. The year before, the president, who was one Harold Shepard of Duke University, and he spoke just after Pearl Harbor. We are dealing with more than a draft or a trade. We are dealing with the very forces that hold us together in society and with the institutions of government that can ensure the democratic ideal as a practical reality. So we think it's difficult now sometimes. Think about how they survived all of that. This is Heman Sweat being, and let me give you a little of his background. The end of World War II inaugurated a fresh look at racial discrimination. So this is 8 years before the decision in Brown versus Education. Heman Sweat was denied admission to Texas Law School solely because of his race. They make clear in the record. 5 future presidents of the AALS and nearly 200 law faculty from around the country got together and signed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court that argued that segregation in education should be held unconstitutional. Thurgood Marshall, pictured here, argued and won the case before the Supreme Court, although, as you know, segregation was not held unconstitutional by the court until 1954. Okay, as we near our halfway point, so now we're into the 1960s, serious debate arose for the first time about whether we needed a professional staff and maybe even a national headquarters. There was a great deal of debate, but in the end, that was the final decision. When Michael Cardozo was recruited as the first executive director, he was a law professor at Cornell, and in this photo is on the far left. He was a cousin of Supreme Court Justice Benjamin Cardozo, and he becomes executive director in 1963. By the end of his path-breaking 10-year term, there were a number of other changes that took place, and I'll mention just a couple. On the left, I hope some of you recognize him, that's Clarence Clyde Ferguson. You should. He became the first person of color to serve on the executive committee in 1966 and 1967. To give you just a little taste of his life before, he'd interrupted his undergraduate studies at Ohio State to serve in the Army in World War II. He was one of those students who left, where he participated in the Normandy invasion. He went on to earn a law degree from Harvard and then became the first black man to serve on the Rutgers faculty. He also made time to serve as general counsel of the United States Civil Rights Commission. Leon Higginbotham, later famously chief judge of the Third Circuit, recalled that when he became one of the first black commissioners at another regulatory agency, he reached out to Ferguson. He reported they spent many evenings discussing the options facing the Kennedy administration about how to convert the ideal of equal justice under law into reality for black Americans. Higginbotham further reported that Clyde Ferguson always remained confident that the legal process would ultimately provide the remedy to make America what it someday must be. In 1974, Soya Menchikoff on the right became the first woman president of the AALS. She was born into an aristocratic Russian family in 1915. She and her parents fled the Russian Revolution when she was 3. In 1937, she graduated from Columbia Law, joined a Wall Street law firm. She later took a leave to work on the Uniform Commercial Code. She married Carl Llewellyn, and they both taught first at Harvard and then at Chicago. She was also the first, and so far, the only woman to have a spouse also serve as AALS president. The second major structural change spurred by the executive director, Cardozo, was the establishment of sections, 1973. Before then, there were things called roundtables that were organized by subject matter. We'd recognize them. But every member of a roundtable had to be appointed by the AALS president. Can you imagine? That top down. It had become pretty unwieldy by the 1970s, needless to say. AALS President Richard Maxwell of UCLA explained that sections were a more democratic way to organize academics. Here's a quote. "I know that some people thought the executive committee simply threw up its hands and decided to turn this organization back to the people. To some extent, that's what we did." A look at the history of sections also is a good way to watch how curriculums developed around the country, because to become a new section, faculty from at least 25 schools have to support the new section. So that part of the book is an interesting look beyond the association. Okay, so the 21st century brought a number of changes. This one's familiar to us today, but it wouldn't have been to most people before 2020. COVID meant faculty at most law schools suddenly had to pivot to online teaching. Most of us in this room remember it well, if not fondly. And the next year, the association had to hold its first virtual annual meeting. Technology has also greatly changed and improved, I would say, the role of sections, because now sections can have their own online discussion list. I hope many of you use it with your section. and actually hold section Zoom meetings of particular interest. And to jump us right up to the present, the other big change in the 21st century has been the increase in programming for deans. Beginning in 2014, we established the Dean's Forum and a Dean's Steering Committee. By 2020, Kelly Testy led the formation of the Dean's Dialogues. If you put all of these actions together, you will see we've greatly increased the ability of the association to serve law school deans as well as faculty and staff. It's not possible to summarize 125 years in a single presentation or even a book. But one way to highlight some of those differences, just for a quick visual comparison, is to look at the first 5 presidents, a lot more facial hair, I have to say, and the most recent 5. I think a better way to summarize it, though, is a quote I encountered only recently, or it would be in the book. This one from Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. The power to turn citizens into lawyers and judges rests with the law schools. Let me say it again, because it's the answer to my question. Why does your job have a future? The power to turn citizens into lawyers and judges rests with the law schools. Not changed is the core commitment to increasing excellence in legal education by sharing new approaches with one another. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, has said that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. It's our hope that you will understand more about American legal education today by looking back at those 125 years, and that may assist you in the future. Thank you.